Welcome to the Super Healthy Human Podcast with your host, Dr. Rodger Murphree.
Do you struggle with fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, depression, high cholesterol, irritable bowel syndrome, restless leg syndrome? Do you have problems with dry skin, brittle nails, losing your hair or the lateral third of your eyebrows, tingling in your hands and feet, cold hands and feet, trouble with balancing your temperature? 1 minute you're freezing, the next minute you're burning up. Hi, this is Dr. Rodger Murphree. I'm the host of Super Healthy Human Podcast, and welcome to this edition where we're going to talk everything to do with thyroid conditions. We're going to do a deep dive in what are some of the symptoms associated with low thyroid function, and more importantly, what are some of the steps you can take to uncover if you might have a problem with your thyroid, and what are the protocols to fix those problems? So first of all, let's talk about what is your thyroid. Well, your thyroid is this master gland. It controls just about every cell in the body. The hormones that it releases, thyroid, T4 and T3, two primary hormones there, are released anytime we need more energy. Our thyroid is responsible for our metabolism, our cellular energy. So it controls our sleep-wake cycle. It controls our moods. It controls our mental clarity, our brain function. It controls our elimination. Are we able to have a bowel movement normally? If you're constipated, a lot of times that can be a sign of low thyroid. It controls our immune system. So anytime the thyroid is compromised, you'll see that the different systems and cells that it controls slow down to the point that it can create some symptoms that we'd see in fibromyalgia. Loss of hair, you're not growing hair like you used to. Brittle nails because the nails are not being repaired. Tingling in your hands and feet because the nerve sensations are not able to be transmitted and reach your extremities, your hands or your feet. Now, if you go to your doctor and you share these different symptoms with them, oftentimes their first thought is, oh, okay, well, let's see, you've got a lot of low energy, brain fog, depressed, constipated. Diffuse achy pain sometimes can be part of thyroid, certainly tingling in the hands and feet, as I mentioned. But if you share these symptoms with your doctor, he or she probably is going to suspect you might have a problem with your thyroid, and they'll run a thyroid test. The problem is they typically run a very basic thyroid panel, just with a couple of markers, TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and then they may do a free or a total T4. The problem with that is that those two markers are really limiting on what you can find out about your thyroid function. They give you kind of a snapshot about what's going on. It's like taking a snapshot of a moving train. You know, you get a little picture, a little window of what's going on, but you don't know what's behind, this part, you don't know what's in front. You just get one little snapshot. So it doesn't tell you a whole lot. But this is what people are used to, and this is what doctors are trained to do, is typically look at the TSH and maybe a free or total T4. Several problems with this. Number one, when we're doing a blood test, what we're looking at is how much thyroid is in the bloodstream 1 second out of 1 minute out of 1 hour out of a day. We can't tell how much is in the cell. And thyroid hormone works in the cells, not in the bloodstream. So it's a little bit of a guesstimation. We know that if you have certain, if your TSH is at this level, that means that you've got plenty of thyroid circulating, thyroid hormone circulating in your system, and you're going to be just fine. Now, TSH goes up when you need more thyroid released, and it goes down when you need less thyroid release. So it's a little bit confusing. Oftentimes, patients will share with me, well, I went to my doctor and he or she said that my thyroid's a little elevated or that it's a little low. Well, what does that mean? You really don't know how to interpret that unless you look at the TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone, to see what that shows. What complicates the matter is, already I shared with you that you want to make sure, you need to realize that the markers are only a sign of what's in your bloodstream. So it doesn't really tell you how well these hormones are getting into your cells. So it's kind of again, it's a guesstimation. To complicate that, what we know is that oftentimes in conventional medicine, what they're using is the conventional lab report, the guide they go by. And in those parameters, they're different than the parameters that functional medicine practitioners like myself use. So we're looking at optimal ranges, and in conventional medicine, they're looking at averages. Now, one thing to keep in mind about lab work averages is what they're doing is they're taking the average of people between a certain age, young adults all the way up to seniors. And they're looking at what is the average from the bottom, the lowest low, to the highest high. And then we want to get everybody kind of in the middle here. The problem with that is number one, they're using the average of people that are walking around that are really the walking wounded. These are people that may not be in the hospital or may not be in their doctor's office right now, but they may or may not have a problem with their thyroid, and they may have other issues going on that can compromise the lab work that's being done. And we still take that data and we assume that this is what the average person should be. Now, average is not optimal, right? Average is a C. And nobody wants to be average. And, we don't want to be average. Certainly don't want to fail, but we don't want to be average either. You want to be at optimal health levels, right? I mean, that's what we're all after. We want to have optimal health where we can do what we want to do, when we want to do it, how we want to do it, feel good about it, right? And so these testing in the conventional medical practice, the TSH, if it's below 5.2, sometimes 4.5, they'll tell you that it's fine, no problem. Well, several years ago, the American College of Endocrinologists, these are hormone specialists, they said that anybody with a TSH above 3.0 should be considered hypothyroid or low thyroid. Hypothyroidism is low thyroid function. Hyperthyroidism is increased overactive thyroid function. Now, we're going to focus on low thyroid or hypothyroidism in this podcast. But it's not unusual for patients to share with me. They went to their doctor, had all the symptoms of low thyroid, and the doctor did a blood test. The TSH came back at 4.9, and they're told everything's fine. Again, remember, what it should be is anything above 3.0, it's been recommended by hormonal specialists, endocrine doctors, that you should be on thyroid medication, or you certainly should have your thyroid. You certainly should treat your thyroid. Okay. So that's the first thing I want to point out, is that the TSH and the T4 is not a complete panel. Okay. It's a little bit of a guesstimation, and using it in conventional medicine, if we're using the TSH, the old parameters, the conventional parameters where your TSH is okay if it's below 4.5 or 5.2, depending on where you're at in the world, that's outdated. If you look at functional medicine lab work guidelines, they'll tell you, again, anything above 3.0. And in my practice, anything that's even above 2.0, I'm looking at suspiciously to see, would this patient benefit from some thyroid medication or some over-the-counter thyroid protocols that I use routinely in my practice. So let's complicate a little further. So the other thing that can happen is, and I see this quite a bit, is that patients are taking thyroid medication. Okay, levothyroxine is one of the most, or Synthroid. These are the two most common medications out there, and those are synthetic T4 medications. Okay, remember I shared with you there are two main thyroid hormones, T4 and T3. Now, T4, there's more of that circulating in your body than there is T3. But T4 is the inactive thyroid hormone. It has to convert into the active T3 before anything really happens. Unfortunately, some people cannot convert synthetic T4 into the active T3. So they go to their doctor, and he or she puts them on medication, looks at their TSH and says, "Oh, you need to be on thyroid medication. Let's put you on levothyroxine or Synthroid, one of these synthetic T4 medications, and you're going to feel better." They start taking the prescription, but they really don't feel much better when they come back 6 months later to get more blood work done. They share that with their doctor. The doctor tells them, well, your blood looks good. Your TSH is now down in the normal level. It was elevated. Now it's down in the normal level for the conventional parameters. And I recommend you stay on that dose. What they're not realizing is that oftentimes the T4 medication, synthroid levothyroxine, is not converting into the active T3. And you can't see that in a routine blood test. The only way to see that is by running a reverse T3. Now, reverse T3 is a hormone, as its name implies. It blocks the conversion of T4 to T3. Now, what causes reverse T3 to go up? Stress. So the more stress you go up, the more likely you get an elevation of reverse T3 and a blockage of T4 to T3. What brings on hypothyroidism in general? Stress. Anytime you get under stress, your body starts to slow everything down in a defensive type posture. When you get under stress, you may find that you have bloating and gas, and everything just feels like it's stuck in your stomach, because part of that is your thyroid slows the motility down, slows down the digestion elimination process. You may find that when you get under a lot of stress mentally, you just aren't as clear thinking as you would like to be. Certainly when you get under a lot of stress, it creates all sorts of nutritional deficiencies that then can sabotage your thyroid function. So where do we start? Well, I'm not through yet. There's another condition I want to share with you called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is an autoimmune disease where your body is attacking your thyroid tissue. And this can be triggered by one of the Epstein-Barr viruses, one of herpes virus, cytomegalovirus, some type of infection. It can be triggered by low vitamin D, gluten intolerance or gluten allergy, in separate to something like celiac. You don't have to have celiac to have it so that when you're eating gluten, the gluten can cause you to have problems with an autoimmune disease where your body attacks the thyroid tissue. Every time you eat gluten, it can trigger this reaction. It can be due to food allergies. It can be due to some other triggers like mold toxins. But whatever that trigger is causing your body to erroneously attack the thyroid cells, the thyroid tissue, generate inflammation that not only is starting to destroy your thyroid tissue, but also can bleed and let those inflammatory chemicals out into the rest of the body, so it can cause other symptoms that are being triggered just from this autoimmune disease associated with thyroid. How do you diagnose that? Well, you diagnose Hashimoto's thyroiditis if you have an elevated thyroid antibody. And there's two main antibodies. One is the TPO antibody, and the other one is the TGB. So ideally, when you go get testing for your thyroid, you would get tested for TSH, which should be below 3.0. You should get tested for free and total T3 and T4. And you want those numbers to be at least in the middle of what is recommended. So if you're free T3, I think depending on what state you're in, it can be between 2.0 and 4.4. So if your T3 is not at 3.0 or somewhere in that range, you might suspect that you're not getting enough of the active T3 circulating in your system. So free and total T3, T4, reverse T3 to make sure that T4 is converting correctly, and then thyroid antibodies. These are the tests that I would encourage you to get done, and ideally you'd get those done a couple of times a year. If you're battling some of the symptoms that I shared with you earlier, then I'd really encourage you to get tested to see if your thyroid can be giving you some issues. Now, let's look at some scenarios. So let's say your TSH is at 4.9 and the range for you, the normal would be 0.45 to to 5.2, let's say, but you come in at 4.9. Your doctor is going to tell you you're fine. Functional medicine practitioners like myself who work with thyroid patients every day, I have hundreds of cases of low thyroid that I've worked with over the years. We would tell you that you need to be on thyroid medication, or if you were working with me, a natural practitioner, I would put you on over-the-counter thyroid supplement that would help to boost your thyroid and get it working properly. And typically that works very well. Normally I can see if someone's TSH is elevated, which is a sign that we need more thyroid hormone. If I put them on over-the-counter thyroid supplement, within 6 to 8 weeks, it normalizes, depending on how severe the problem is. Now, if someone comes back and they say, well, my TSH is at 2.0, I probably would not fool with that unless they have all the symptoms of low thyroid. And let's say I've done all this stuff, I've done a full panel and everything looks good. The antibodies are normal, reverse T3 looks good, but the TSH looks good, the T3, T4 look good. So everything looks good, but the person has all the symptoms of low thyroid. Then what I would recommend is that they do a self-test to see what their metabolism is doing. So you can self-test your metabolism, kind of see how well or how poorly your thyroid is doing by doing a temperature test. Now, this was something that was recommended 80 years ago or so by Dr. Broda Barnes, who was an endocrinologist, came up with this a way to be able to see if your metabolism, if your thyroid is working correctly. Cellular energy is heat. That's this heat that's in your cells generates the heat that's in the cells generates this energy, helps you break down food and use the food as fuel, and then drives enzymatic processes and other things that are going on in the body. So what you can do is you can take a basal thermometer, preferably a mercury thermometer. If you can find one here in the United States, you can't, but you could take a basal thermometer, and then what you want to do with that is shake it down. And then before you get out of bed in the morning, first thing, put it underneath your arm and leave it there 10 minutes. Now, what you want to do is do that over a 7-day period, see what the average is. If the average is 97.8 or below, that's a sign of low metabolism, low thyroid function. And that combined with a lot of the symptoms that you have with low thyroid, in particular, cold hands, cold feet, some of these things that are showing that your body temperature runs low, is a sign that you might benefit from thyroid medication. Now, remember, when we're doing the thyroid testing, we're only measuring what's in the bloodstream, not what's in the cell. So you could have a thing called euthyroid syndrome, where you have all the symptoms of low thyroid, even though your tests are normal. Depending on the person, it's oftentimes beneficial to do a trial of 1 to 2 months of a low dose of medication, or to do a over-the-counter supplement protocol that I use with my patients that can help them to kick that thyroid in, no matter what the test shows, but to kick the thyroid in so they have more energy mentally and physically, start to see maybe that the hair starts to grow, the brittle nails start to improve, they no longer are constipated, cholesterol levels go down, moods dramatically improve. In fact, speaking of moods and thyroid, one of the most potent antidepressants out there is T3, so active thyroid hormone. And when that's low, we know there's a direct connection between depression and low T3. So if you're having some low mood issues, certainly worth investigating to see if you have a thyroid problem. Now, let's say you get your test results back and your thyroid antibodies are elevated. It's either the TPO, the TGB. If those are elevated, then that's a sign that you're developing Hashimoto's thyroiditis, no matter what your TSH says. Now, in conventional medicine, what they'll do, if they do the thyroid antibody test, and they usually don't, but if they do and they come back elevated and your TSH is within their normal limits, they'll tell you, we're just going to watch it. There's no problem. Now, there is a problem with that. The problem is just watching the fact that your body's attacking the thyroid tissue, even though your TSH is normal, so they're not going to put you on medication, is waiting for your car to break down. It's like the oil light comes on or the engine light comes on and they tell you, you're okay for now. You're fine. You keep driving. But sooner or later, your thyroid is going to burn out because the body's releasing inflammatory chemicals attacking your thyroid tissue. So this over-aggressiveness by your immune system can create all the symptoms we see in low thyroid, even if your TSH is normal. Now, the question is, well, why do doctors do that? Well, they do that because in conventional medicine, they don't know how to treat the beginning of Hashimoto's until it's at the point where you no longer have a thyroid producing enough TSH or producing enough hormones, and then they put you on prescription thyroid medication, typically one of the synthetic T4 medications. But until that happens, they just tell you we're going to watch it. Now, this is also true if you go and they may pick up thyroid nodules, which can be the beginning of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And then we'll just tell you, well, we'll just watch those. We'll watch those nodules. There's no big deal, no problem. But if you're one of these individuals that can barely get out of bed because you're so exhausted, or you're battling depression and brain fog, or just tingling in your hands and feet, any kind of nerve pain, waiting another 4, 5, 6, 7 years before the thyroid finally burns out and your TSH elevates, and then they'll say, oh, now you got hypothyroidism. Let's put you on thyroid medication. I mean, I don't think that's the answer. And I think that's a bad paradigm, a bad model. So I would encourage you, if you have elevated thyroid antibodies, to reach out and work with a functional medicine practitioner who can help you with those protocols. Because it's not about just taking thyroid hormone. If you have Hashimoto's, true Hashimoto's is elevated thyroid antibodies and elevated TSH. And this is the number one reason for people being diagnosed with hypothyroidism. But there's a big gap sometimes between elevated thyroid antibodies and elevated TSH. It could be years, and yet you have all the symptoms of low thyroid. Functional medicine practitioners are trained, or many are, myself included, in how to work with the beginning of Hashimoto's and even complete Hashimoto's to help you turn that condition around with certain supplements and diets and things that can really make a dramatic improvement in your health. We look at Hashimoto's in the conventional approach. If they finally catch that, it's about putting you on a prescription medication, prescription hormones. Need to realize, though, it's not that you need more hormones. It's that something is attacking your thyroid tissue. Your immune system is over aggressively attacking your thyroid tissue. And we need to know what is the cause of that. It's not that you need more thyroid hormones, although sometimes that can be beneficial. But ideally, you want to know, is it a problem with a normally dormant virus now has raised its ugly head and the body's trying to get rid of that? And by attacking the thyroid, by attacking the virus, it's also attacking the thyroid. Or maybe every time you eat gluten, your body overreacts to that and it attacks your thyroid cells, or any kind of food allergy, or a mold toxin. There's different things that can be triggers, and it sometimes takes a good bit of detective work, testing, and having someone that's really dealt with this condition with multiple patients over the years to be able to figure that out. But ideally, you want to treat the underlying cause of Hashimoto's. You want to treat the underlying cause of the symptoms that we see in low thyroid, not just go on thyroid medication. Now, let's look at a couple more scenarios. So let's say that you're taking Synthroid and you go back to your doctor and he or she says, yeah, all your blood tests look good, but they don't run the reverse T3. I would encourage you to find a practitioner who will run that for you, get your reverse T3 checked to see if that medication's working. Now, some of you would do better on a different medication, a prescription medication called Armour, Westhroid, or Natrethroid. So these medications, they're prescriptions. They're a combination of T3 and T4. So that can be For some people, it makes all the difference in the world. Now, some of you may have tried to take Armour Thyroid or West Thyroid or Nature Thyroid, and it backfired on you. You couldn't take it. It was too much. It revved you up. It made you feel jittery, raised your blood pressure, or you just didn't feel well on it. Sometimes that can happen even when you try to raise your synthetic medication. And typically it has to do with the low adrenal function. So your adrenal glands are your stress coping glands. They sit on top of your kidneys and they release certain hormones to allow you to deal with stress. One of those is cortisol. DHEA is another one. If you try to rev your metabolism up too quickly, either with synthetic hormones or switching from synthetic to one of the more natural T4, T3 combination hormone, prescription hormones like Armour, West Thyroid, Nature Thyroid, if you try to make that switch, sometimes if your adrenal glands are really weak and you have this thing called adrenal fatigue, you see that you can't tolerate this change. And so what happens is you never can get your prescription dose high enough really for it to help you like it could. Or you can't go from a medication that's not converting into a more natural hormone, combination hormone, T3, T4, you can't tolerate it. So what you want to do is then treat adrenal fatigue. Now, how would you know if you have adrenal fatigue? Well, good question. The symptoms of adrenal fatigue are very similar to those we see in low thyroid function. Brain fog, fatigue, anxiety, depression, sometimes weight gain. We definitely see weight gain a lot of times with low thyroid. Brittle nails, loss of hair, constipation. These are some of the things that we see even with adrenal fatigue. And ideally, you would have that tested with the 4 saliva sample profile. So you take your cortisol levels are the highest first thing in the morning. And then as the day goes on, that cortisol level starts to drop so that it's at its lowest at bedtime, because cortisol is stimulating. So your cortisol is the highest first thing in the morning, and your melatonin level, your sleep hormone, is at its lowest. As the day goes on, you see cortisol starting to go down. And as the sun goes down and it gets darker, we see the melatonin level go up. Okay. Your cortisol level, ideally, though, is going to be at its highest in the morning and the lowest at bedtime. For some of you, you get your days and nights mixed up. So your cortisol level is kind of low in the morning, and then towards bedtime, it spikes up, and that may keep you from being able to fall asleep or stay asleep. So that 4 sample saliva test is really a great test. It's one that I use on just about every patient that I work with. Now, if you want to kind of get an idea, though, what your adrenals are doing, they could be an issue, then you can self-test by going into a dark bathroom, the lights off, okay? Cover one eye, and while you're looking in the mirror, shine a pen light into the other eye. Now, what you should see is that your pupil should constrict. It should get smaller. If it dilates, if it gets larger, that's a sign of adrenal fatigue, okay? Now, you can also test it by testing your blood pressure lying down. Take your blood pressure, and then take your blood pressure again when you stand up. Take it within 30 seconds of standing. Now, you want to take your blood pressure in the left arm, and when you stand up, you want to make sure when you take the blood pressure that your left arm is perpendicular, so it's out front, and it's at heart level. Ideally, what you would see is that systolic number, the top number, should go up by 10 points. It should certainly go up. If it goes up a few points, stays the same, or drops, that's a sign of adrenal fatigue. And there's protocols for that. Now, in my practice, I use over-the-counter adrenal supplements, adrenal cortex supplements, to help my patients to fix their adrenal fatigue, to help with their energy low energy that's being caused by the adrenal fatigue. And oftentimes I see that I have to do both, work on the adrenal glands and the thyroid, for them really to get the most benefit from the thyroid protocols. Well, I know I've covered a lot, and I hope this was helpful. Let's do a recap. I recommend that you get a free in total T3, T4, a TSH, a reverse T3, and the thyroid antibodies, TPO and TGB. I recommend that you get that testing when you get your thyroid tested. You can self-test if you want to kind of get an idea of what your metabolism is, because the body temperature is your metabolism. And this is evident when you are fighting off an infection. If you have fighting off a cold or a flu or something, you can run a fever. And part of what's happening is the body's raising your body temperature to help to destroy, to kill this pathogen that's taking over your body. For some of you, your temperature never raises even when you have a temperature. It never goes up, and you have all the symptoms of the flu, and you feel like for you your temperature is elevated, but we take it, it's 98.0 or something, or 97.8, whatever. But your body temperature is your metabolism. So a way to tell if your thyroid and your metabolism are at optimal levels, or to self-test by taking your temperature first thing in the morning, right before you get out of bed. Shake down a basal thermometer, put it in your arm, and then do that over 7 days. Take the average. And if the average is 97.8 or below, that's a sign of low thyroid. Now, most conventional doctors are going to ignore that. So you'll have to find a functional practitioner like myself who would be able to then help you with that. Now, ideally, that's kind of just a broad test, and then you get the blood test done. And then we talked a little bit about the adrenals as well. So these are some of the things I want you to start thinking about if you're battling some of the symptoms that I shared earlier. There's a good possibility that your thyroid is behind the symptoms. It's the root cause of your symptoms. And your doctors are just missing the opportunity to help you because they're doing basic testing, or they're using the wrong medication, or they have not dealt with the adrenal fatigue, so you can't raise your thyroid prescription dose. That can be a problem. Or as I mentioned, the thyroid medication that you're taking, the synthetic medication, is not converting to the active form. Now, I want to encourage you to go to superhealthyhuman.com, and there you can find a thyroid report. So grab that thyroid report to go into much more detail than I share with you today. But I hope you found this podcast helpful. And I want to encourage you to listen to all the podcasts, Super Healthy Human Podcast, and check out the website for the free report at superhealthyhuman.com.